that you also keep an account that you know when your time is ending, stuff like that. Also, if you're starting a speech, feel free to test visibility and also state your QR differences. Aside from that, let's probably have motion confirmation. And we have affirmative speaker number 1 read first the motion.
The motion we have is this House believes that the IMF removing all conditions on these loans except for explicit anti-corruption provisions is preferable to the recent conditions of developing countries.
Cool. Can we confirm opposition speaker number 3? Is that the same motion you guys have?
Yes, we have the same motion.
All right, cool then. I think we shall invite the first affirmative speaker to start first the debate. Here.
Can I confirm audibility? Am I audible?
Yes, you're loud and clear.
Okay. Chair, I'm going to begin my speech in 3, 2, 1. Chair, extra money and can't get them from their domestic taxes. They're not large enough economies, hence run to the IMF, right? We see that the IMF is imposing heavy conditions in these developing countries, which force them to run to countries like China. But countries like China provide a drop in the ocean in terms of what they actually need towards like building infrastructure, improving the economic policies, but then also maybe averting the effects of climate change. Hannah, what am I going to do for you in this particular debate? One, I'm going to show you what the problem of this debate is. Secondly, I'm going to characterize the motion. Thirdly, I'm going to show you both sides burden of proof. Fifth, I'm going to show you the harms of the current IMF conditions and why then we think that they should be removed. Then next, I'm going to show you why only corruption provisions is literally most effective as a sole, can remain like literally as a sole condition. But then sixth, I'm going to prove preferability. My second speaker will come and rebut and show you why we win this debate, right? Okay, firstly, what is the main problem of this debate? Who should the winner be? Which side should you side for, right? You should side for the House that proves whether the condition imposed by IMF on these loans to developing countries are one, either helping them or hindering these developing countries' ability to achieve sustainable economic development, right? Okay, but firstly, what does the IMF look like, right? This is an international body that lends money to works to achieve sustainable growth and prosperity for member states by providing one, financial assistance, but then secondly, supporting economic policies that support economic stability, as well as reducing poverty, right? By providing these funds. Now, removing all conditions, those are just removing all the conditions as stated in the info slide. But then thirdly, what do these developing countries look like? This looks like countries with high unemployment, countries with high debt burdens, countries with no money to spend themselves, countries with people who are literally illiterate, right? Okay, what is the burden of proof for both sides of the house? On our side of the house, we need to prove to you how establishing the harm of current, to prove the establishment of how the harm caused by these current IMF conditions, right? Then also the preferability, right? Okay, the other side has to come and defend all the necessities of the current conditions, but then also challenge argue for the potential risk, right? Okay, now look at the case study of Kenya, right? Now Kenya, in 2021, the IMF agreed to help Kenya, right? However, they put a condition on them for fiscal policies, right, and increasing the government revenue through tax. But then what did this bring about? This brought about backlash from the people. This brought about social unrest. This brought about youth rioting, right? Because they say that these people, vulnerable people, are poor and cannot help themselves, right? So if we're going to tax them or put conditions, and then we're going to harm them even more. But then secondly, another case scenario, look at Argentina, right? We see that they had in 2018 they had a loan of 57 billion US dollars, which was literally the largest in IMF history, right? But then the IMF put austerity measures, imposed these conditions for the land, which just exasperated the economic hardship, which then led to higher inflation and unemployment. And by 2023, this country has just been facing economic instability with protests over austerity measures, and we see that the literally it's causing backlash from the people, right? So we think that then they should be removed, and once they are removed, we think that the IMF should just help these certain like countries to help them improving their economy instead of literally making the position in which they are even worse, right? Okay, but then moving on. Uh, but then, okay, why would our side of the house literally remove all this and only sustain the corruption provision as a sole condition, right? We need to show you that the major reasons why countries, especially developing countries, are still not developing is because of corruption, right? Look at the 500 billion that was stolen during that program, right? If we never stole that 500 billion, then we think that Uganda would be in a different place. Look at the 11 billion from the USSS that was stolen, right? If at all it was not stolen, corruption was not there, then we think it would be in a different place, right? Look at that 20 million US dollars from the global fund that was stolen by right? We think that if at all we have literally maintain only this anti-corruption provision, then we think we are going to fight corruption, and we see that if we receive the funds from these IMFs, then we are then going to use it like in the best of its ability to literally improve on like the economic sectors and improve on the policies, right? What are our main trade-offs? I believe my second speaker is going to come and push on that. One, we think it's going to be on the risk of mismanagement, right? I believe my time is up. I believe panel our side of the house has an upper hand because one, we have literally showed you the harms that are caused by the current IMF conditions through this case study. And my second speaker is going to extend my speech and show you why we win this debate with their side negative to come and defend the necessity of the current conditions and challenge the potential risks of removing them. I am going to rest my case.
Okay, the house thanks about this speaker number one for that fine speech. May welcome the first opposition speaker. Here.
All right. Just to check audibility.
Speaker, you're audible, but you're sort of breaking. So, and first try
Can someone
testing again.
confirm if I'm audible enough? All right. Is it clear enough now?
Yeah, it's now clear.
All right. Let me just set my timer real quick. All right. I'll be beginning my speech in 3, 2, 1. Sure, in a nutshell, what the sessions here? Yes, we consider the context they then give us on these nations that they're impoverished, they're facing a lot of economic instability, they're facing a lot of unemployment. So, this whole kind of context is further determined to and weaponized on their end of the house because it kind of paints out the urgency and the need for these loans. Sure. So it then means that these countries highly need these loans in order to better themselves from this economic crisis, and the only place they can get them is an international monetary fund, and we believe that. And our concession to make is that on the agency of corruption. Yes, it has a lot of bad things, and therefore it shows that the spectrum of corruption in these countries is something very big, and it's going to take a lot of time to solve, which I'm going to build on more. On burdens, they come and give us a wrong burden that we're supposed to support all other policies being in place. That is a very wrong burden, and they completely fail to understand what are the burdens each team has in this debate. Proposition had one clear burden. They had to come and show us that removing all other policies and leaving corruption is preferable for those other nations. They have to defend why putting these countries with the necessity to solve corruption, why is it preferable? Are these countries then in and of themselves able to solve corruption to get that necessity to get the loan? They completely fail on that by justifying why they removed other things. That's not the whole point of the debate. Secondly, our whole burden as an opposition team is to come and show you that why, yes, are all removing other policies was justified, we allowed that. This whole debate is on whether corruption provision should stand or not. Our part is to show you why these corruption provisions should be removed, this anti-corruption, because they don't put these nations in a preferable state. With that, I believe team of proposition begins to lose out on this debate before even they build on any substantives. So firstly, on argumentation, why do on our stance we believe that these countries are not going to be, you're not putting them in their preferable state by leaving anti-corruption provisions there.
Speaker, you are breaking. I stopped your time at 1 minute 30 seconds. You are still just beginning your first argument. That's why I lost you from. You can hear me. You can start from when you are beginning your first argument.
Set up, I already set up and showed you how to pitch that.
Speaker, you're breaking. Speaker, you're breaking. We haven't been able to hear you like for the past 2 minutes, I guess.
What, or what's the last thing you had so that I can fit from there?
You are just beginning your argument. So like going to run the first argument or a debate. I think I stopped your time at 1:30, 1 minute and 30 seconds. So you can start from
1
there.
minute 30 seconds, right?
Yeah, sure.
It's very
Yeah, it's clear.
all right. I'll resume my speech in 3, 2, 1. So, one thing I want to paint and frame in this whole argument is what does anti-corruption provisions look like? Anti-corruption provisions look like whistleblower protection, looks like heavy checks and balances, looks like having a lot of a big monitoring system and anti-bribery laws. That's what anti-corruption provision looks like. On this, the whole essence of this argument is to show you that this whole process is going to be lengthy. And one thing to note is that for this country to get these loans, for countries like Uganda and Kenya to get these loans, it has to prove to you how these things are then going to firstly be effective and no corruption is existent. Something which is going to put these countries in a very unconducive kind of state. So, on the thesis of this whole thing, I'm trying to prove to you that this whole thing is going to make these countries unable and incapable of paying this whole kind of get this loan. On analysis, 2 layers you're going to get from this on how it's going to be a delayed and lengthy process. Firstly, on the technological advancements, to have a system that is not corrupted at all, it's going to look like the United States system with heavy checks and balances and a big monitoring system. Look at the necessities that were there to put up such a thing. Firstly, there were a lot of resources and money put into this kind of thing and compliance. That's why things like the United States were able to have a corruption-free system because they have a lot of resources and money in themselves. But look at countries like Uganda. First of all, we're a third world country, and to make matters worse, we're from an economic crisis. This shows you that the technological advancements are going to be very expensive to be imported in this country. Checks and balances and monitoring systems are going to be very expensive to sustain. However, that kind of technological advancement is not going to be there. So the importance of this whole thing is to show you that these countries won't be able to have anti-corruption provision. So with this anti-corruption provision existing, the countries don't have enough money to actually even put them into place. End of the day, they don't get those kind of loans, and International Monetary Fund feels out on its burden to kind of protect all these kind of nations. John, second have analysis on the structures of these developing countries. Look at countries like Uganda, the developing countries that need a lot of loan. The structural things which are existing, the structures that are existing, that even these people who are supposed to stop corruption are influenced a lot by the corrupt people. The corrupt leaders are the ones who have all the power and authority. And even though you try to be a whistleblower, you then killed. So these kind of structures which are able and inevitable to fight show you that fighting corruption is going to be something very hard. So that look at things like anti-corruption provision, which need a lot of whistleblower protection and anti this people needs a lot of complex system, and fighting corruption is going to may get the money and one. This is going to show that this is going to be a very lengthy process, and we need the money now based on their current characterization. It's very urgent. We need the money right now, so it's going to be a very lengthy process, and so the importance of this whole argument is to show you that even the existence of anti-corruption provision is not putting these countries in a favorable state. So why do we then fulfill our major burden? Our major burden was show you how the existence of this anti-corruption provision put these countries in an unfavorable condition, and we believe we have done that to show you that they are incapable and countries won't be able to do that. So at the end of that day, we show you that this anti-corruption provision existing, the countries are not going to get the loans, they're going to continue suffering. And on an impact analysis, we see that the people in these countries are going to stay impoverished. The country is going to stay on that underdevelopment level. International Monetary Fund is then going to fill out on its whole burden. And with that, I believe we win this debate, and I'm glad to oppose.
The host thanks up one for that speech. Let's invite the second propositional speaker.
Okay. So, panel, can I first confirm audibility?
Sure, you're loud and clear. Second prop, please.
I apologize for that mistake. Okay, I begin in three, 2, 1. So, panel, in the past few years, we have seen the IMF bringing in its conditions to aid countries like Greece, to aid countries like Argentina, to aid countries like Pakistan, to aid countries like Kenya. But in all these countries, panel, one thing that is alike, while the IMF is trying to help them, we see that the conditions brought upon have always caused more harm than good to the population of these countries, something that the IMF has always considered too. So, panel, in the motion that this House believes that the IMF should put down these conditions and focus more, should put down all these conditions and only remain with the anti-corruption provisions. Side negative has clearly failed to understand their burden in the debate. They believe that side affirmative is saying that we should bring they're pretending like side affirmative is the one bringing in the idea of anti-corruption provisions, and yet they have not clearly read the info side and seen that the anti-corruption provisions already existed amongst the IMF's conditions. What this debate is actually about is whether they should be the only ones to remain and the other conditions dropped into the basket. They don't understand that their major burden in this debate was to show why those conditions should remain, why those conditions are valid, and why they are not affecting people. So, panel, what has my first speaker clear? I'm going to continue with rebuttal and then extend in our case if I have the time. So what has our first speaker clearly showed? Our first speaker has clearly showed you what our burden in the debate was, to show that the harm caused by these current IMF conditions is too significant to let them ride around freely. So, panel, the first speaker negative gives us barely anything to engage with when it comes to this, because they have only been trying to rebut us on the point of anti-corruption provisions. And if the anti-corruption provisions have always existed, in their whole speech, they just keep on telling us how anti-corruption provisions are too long, they're too severe, they're too what. They don't even talk about how these already existing conditions are what is good for the countries. Side negative completely wastes their first speech and gives us no content to engage with, because they don't fulfill their burden in the debate to show us why the conditions are necessary. Whereas on side affirmative, my first speaker has clearly showed you that first of all, these already existing conditions, like the setting of currency exchange rates to international markets, the eliminating of fuel subsidies and other things, have always had a significant negative impact on the different countries that the IMF imposes on them. She has shown you case studies like in Kenya, whereby the IMF requested that, whether the IMF pushed the president to increase taxes so as to turn the country into a revenue basket. And then she has showed you how in Kenya we've had several riots from the youth because of these tax increments, because of this severe burden placed upon the citizens, and how this IMF while it's pretending to help Kenya's economic system, has actually thrown it down to the ground because of these now protests against its policies. So, as my first speaker has clearly showed you, the IMF's conditions are highly detrimental to the growth of these different countries, and therefore they should go. And we see, as my first speaker has clearly showed you, corruption, anti-corruption provisions that are already existing amongst the IMF's conditions, not side negative, that are already existing in the IMF's conditions. She has showed you why these anti-corruption provisions are the best way for these countries to develop, because corruption spans widely. It spans through nepotism, it spans through the embezzlement of funds that have been putting down these several economically deprived countries for long. We've seen that by strengthening the point on anti-corruption provisions. Side affirmative pushes IMF to push these countries to be able to get leaders who are more competent, who are able to bring in better policies, and push the country to be able to pay the IMF's loans. And we see that side negative clearly ignores its burdens and doesn't show us how these conditions are actually good. Side affirmative, however, fulfills its burden of showing you the harm caused by these current IMF conditions and how corruption provisions should be the only ones to stay, because they are the most efficient way for the countries to be better helped by the IMF. Thank you.
The House thanks Proposition Speaker number 2 for that fine speech. We welcome the second opposition speaker. Here.
Okay, just to like confirm audibility, am I audible?
Yeah, you're loud and clear.
All right, just a minute. All right, I begin my speech in 3, 2, 1. There is need to understand that the burden from side opposition is to necessarily show you that the developing countries would not prefer having this anti-corruption measure as the only measure at the end of the day. And this is something we try to show you in a form of total rebuttal that we run in our kind of case, or a form of rebuttal that we keep on running from our first speaker's speech. This is something they fail to understand. So moving deeper into our case here, on rebuttal. From their kind of case, we get a world whereby they frame for something like anti-corruption provisions being the necessary condition to get loans. We feel like this is something that's not going to be preferred by developing countries. Why? We believe that one, as my first speaker characterized for you, it is necessarily a long process. But then secondly, we tell that this is basically a major problem which necessarily benefits the high people in the government, this corruption that I'm talking about. So at the end of the day, we feel like even with measures put into place, we feel like this something is going to be very inefficient. So with this being inefficient here, we feel like these anti-corruption provisions may then not be provided at the end of the day, or if they are provided, they may be provided after a long time. And realize that my first speaker talked about one thing or two, that there's an urgency of this kind of loans that we need them. So at the end of the day, we feel like this kind of loans coming in late or not coming at all doesn't necessarily benefit the developing countries. So back to our burden, we feel like we fulfill by showing that the anti-corruption provisions would then not be preferred by these countries at the end of the day. Moving on to religion. Yeah, they come and assert onto our case that, you know what, this kind of things are necessarily, we should show you why these kind of things are necessarily needed at the end of the day, or why these other kind of measures are necessarily needed at the end of the day. We feel like we are not liable to fulfill that burden on our side, simply because it's not a burden that's not a burden that's necessarily incurred to us by our first speaker, but by the first speaker who simply asserts and fail to understand what our case all runs about. So with this chair, I'm going to run deeper into our kind of argumentation. We tell that the kind of unlikelihood of providing anti-corruption provisions. We tell that analysis is, as my first speaker told, is that one, it's a lengthy process, but then second, there's going to be a major problem. So we feel like if these kind of things are put into place, we see that this kind of variables that they talk about are necessarily symmetrical. But But realize in our kind of world, we feel like we solve this kind of we feel like this kind of thing is on a lower magnitude, simply because okay, we may have rights, but at the end of the day, we feel like with this kind of four things put into place as already evidenced by status quo, we still get the loans from the IMF. So at the end of the day, we feel like that kind of world necessarily brings about rights, and at the end of the day, we don't even get the loans. And then, Chair, on a greater comparative, we tell that, Chair, we feel like with this kind of anti-corruption existent, we tell the reason as why it's existent, and they may try to come and tell us that, you know what, this is something that is existent, and you cannot tell us that it's not. You cannot tell us it's not working simply because it's existent with these other three. We tell the reason as why it's working is simply because these other three necessarily are poorly. That is to say, we feel like the IMF necessarily, if you have like about 3 to 1, necessarily gives you the loans. So at the end of the day, where we put out this three and remain with that one whereby we cannot even cater for it, we feel like at the end of the day we do not get the loans. So with this year, we feel like we win on this kind of debate, and my third speaker will come and give you a way up on how we win. Thank you very much.
Okay, the House thanks Optu for that fine speech. May I welcome the third speaker from opposition side. Yeah,
Am I audible?
yeah, you're loud and clear.
Okay, I'll begin my speech in 3, 2, 1. Hano. This House believes that the IMF removing all conditions on these loans except for explicit anti-corruption provisions is preferable to the recent conditions of developing countries, right? So both teams had a burden to prove on affirmative why it is preferable for these conditions to actually be removed for the developing countries and according to the recent conditions, and for negative to prove why removing all these conditions is then not preferable. So I'm going to first do a bit of rebuttal and then move on to the major clashes of the debate. Firstly, what we get from side negative is, when you have these sort of anti-corruption provisions, it's going to be lengthy, it's going to take time, and it's going to even be expensive. These developing countries, as characterized by my first speaker, are poor, have economic instability, and therefore wouldn't be able to sustain it. And from my first speech, the second, we tell you that what is it? That corruption is a problem that actually needs to be solved. If they're saying that where anti-corruption, living this anti-corruption provision is actually not preferable, they'll rather prefer a world where there's actually a sort of like corruption existing with this sort of funds. It's telling you that one of the reasons why these countries are actually in this sort of conditions is because they do not actually have proper accountability for these funds, and this is why we should leave these anti-corruption provisions such that these countries are then more accountable and more responsible for these the funds they are given, right? We tell you that corruption is a huge problem, and one of the reasons why these countries still stay at the bottom is because of the corruption that then takes place within the countries, and this is why this provision should then say, because one is preferable for them if they are like accountable and responsible, they'll become grows faster and have a better way of handling the funds because they are organized, right? Then they come and tell us that, actually, from the first and the second speech, they keep relying on that, right? It's lengthy, it's expensive, these developing countries won't be able to afford it, and this is why it's not preferable for them, right? But from my first speech, we tell you that our world is a much more preferable world for these developing countries because the other conditions initially put a strain and stress on these particular countries. They give you a status of Kenya, of where people actually live and started rioting, right? We tell that these other conditions are putting a strain on how these economies work and how these governments work, and they wouldn't really want such a world, right? And this is why we tell you that when we remove all the other conditions, we provide a preferable world for these people, because now the stress is actually less removed, but now they just have another burden of being, accountable and being like, corrupt, sort of combating corruption. But then that corruption goes beyond, being nepotism, all that. It also goes like the funds that are actually given to these particular people. And this is why our preferable world for these developing countries that are suffering from economic instability, from poverty, from unemployment, and still one of the major reasons is corruption, is therefore a world where these anti-provision corrupt conditions actually stay into place, and we did not get any engagement or rebuttal that then comes from other side, other than claiming that this anti-corruption thing should remove, and they do not sort of engage what we tell you from our side, that this is a much preferable world because they will now have to be more accountable as this, are now being accounted for under the corruption system. So now moving on to the clash of the debate, right? What we get from the second speech that then draws down to one, which world is more preferable for these developing countries, right? Before that, we get something that when we look at our world, there will still be riots, but on their side, they're still going to get the loans even without these provisions. But no, we see this is why these countries are actually remaining poor and having this sort of economic stability. We tell that corruption is a problem that needs to be solved, irrespective of all the other conditions that then try to promote accountability and make these economies grow. We do need to find accountability within this corruption sector because it's one of the major problems, and this is why these countries always stay at the bottom, right? This is why we tell you that these economies should then have this sort of loans, right? So now, on which world is these developing countries better, right? We tell you that it's on our side, right? What we get from side negative is that because the anti-corruption provisions are lengthy and expensive, hectic, we are not actually not going to be a preferable world panel. We tell you that these provisions have already been existing, right? It means that countries have already been doing it, right? But then secondly is that this sort of we tell you that when this sort of provisions stay, they make these countries more accountable to actually solve corruption within their countries, so that one, they reduce most of the problems like poverty and economic instability, so that they promote a world of like a much better world than what side negative brings. And this is why, Pana, I tell you that we win this particular debate because we show you a preferable world for these countries. We tell you that by leaving these exceptions for that anti-corruption, these countries will be more incentivized to actually be more accountable and have responsible for the funds they're given, which means they'll be much are given, and this is why we win.
White House, thanks, position speaker number 3, for that fine speech. We welcome the last speaker of the day, opposition speaker number 3, to stand the case of the opposition team. Here.
Thank you. I'd like to confirm audibility.
Yes, you're loud and clear.
Okay, thank you. I will be beginning my speech in 3, 2. Oh, my bad. I say in 3, 2, 1. So, panel, in this entire debate, firstly, side proposition has failed to engage us because they believe our case is very shaky. So let me first explain to you what our case stands for. Our case is not fronting for getting rid of corruption and all that. Our case is standing for how these people, all these developing countries, are going to acquire the loan because they actually need this loan to actually develop at the end of the day. So how is it possible for them to get this loan when the condition of explicit anti-corruption provisions actually exists at the end of the day? So one, yes, we do, to rebuttal, one, we do accept that corruption needs to be solved, but the levels of corruption in developing countries are way too high. Just as you have seen that in Kenya, whereby these people are rioting, they are rioting because of decisions made by the bodies above them. The decisions made by the bodies above them are made by people who tend to be corrupt. So the levels are high at this stage and they cannot be solved. But these countries at the end of the day still need to develop. So they actually need these funds in order to actually develop. So if they do not get these loans, how will they be able to develop? So on their side, in a long run, at the end of the day, in like a millennia's time or so, that's when they'll actually be able to get these loans, because they are going to keep on focusing on getting rid of corruption. And when our grandkids have got their kids, that's when they'll actually get the loans. While on our side, when we actually get this development, at the end of the day, we may even find particular metrics that may actually be able to get rid of these corrupt officials that actually exist in government. That is all I had to engage on side proposition side. Moving on, as I already said, our side is standing or has a stance particularly on how these countries are going to acquire the funds. And we do not accept that these explicit anti-corruption provisions are actually very beneficial or will be able to actually help these countries get the funds because the loans, because they actually need these loans at the end of the day, considering the recent conditions that these developing countries have been going through. They need these loans urgently to actually be able to develop. So what have we given you as side opposition? One, we have shown you how it is very lengthy and not preferable for the IMF to actually implement these anti-corruption provisions, because if they are to actually implement this, these corrupt countries will take a very long time to actually get rid of corruption, because you're looking at things such as leaders or people who you do not even know actually exist in the government, or transferring of funds which happens in such a quick manner that you can't even identify that. So at the end of the day, these funds are all being diverted, and so the corruption rate keeps on increasing. But still, at the end of the day, these countries still require these loans to actually develop. So rather than actually actually putting these loans and all, since because even IMF, according to the info slide as side proposition has been basing its case, IMF still wants to make countries capable of receiving and repaying these loans. So how are they going to do that when they put such a heavy condition on these countries? Yet these countries still require those loans. So, and then two, we still show you how the unlikelihood of tackling corruption still happens right now. Because fine, yes, it may affect these various countries as whole, but at the end of the day, these countries still need those funds. As I've kept on saying, these countries still need those funds. So the unlikelihood of tackling corruption in the current status quo is very difficult. It would be better off to give these countries the funds so that they may actually be able to develop and maybe help their people and all that. Maybe that would be a good solution to the problems that countries like Kenya, as they kept on putting in their example, to end these riots that actually happen because people feel like they are tormented because of the government and all that. So at the end of that day, as I showed you all that, while side proposition clearly rejects our whole stance and our whole burden, but we have clearly shown you. Firstly, we have clearly fulfilled our burden. We are fully engaged with all the arguments given to us by side opposition and shown them how these anti-corruption provisions are actually very disturbing to these developing countries because of the recent conditions that they have actually experienced in past days. And still, yeah, and still showing you the harm caused by these anti-corruption provisions in these countries. So at the end of that day, all that we believe that the IMF should actually, rather than considering the anti-corruption provisions, they should still give these loans to these countries at a cheaper extent or at a cheaper rate, rather than leaving them there. And at the end of the day, they won't be able to develop, as is the stance for developing countries. I rest my case.
Right. The House thanks opposition speaker number 3 for that speech. We welcome the opposition replied speaker to wrap up the case of the opposition team. Here. Just to let you know, for replied speech you have 2 minutes. Opposition team, please.
Just a request. Could we be given like a minute or so just to flatten? Because in the past rounds we have not been doing